Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. We're going to be talking about arts-based research with Dr. Casey Burkholder. And before we get started, I'm just going to share my screen for a sec. Here we go. And from current slide. That should pop up in a sec. There we go. Perfect. So for those that may not be super aware, I work with Roots of Hope, which is a community suicide prevention project that's happening in the Northern Zone in Nova Scotia here. And it is through our work with Roots of Hope that we've organized a series of online conversations with folks who are doing research in different ways, but really focused to amplify our community's voices and understanding people's experiences and create research that is meaningful to communities and helpful to them. Excellent. All right, and before we get going, I just wanted to do our land acknowledgement here. So I am situated here in Mi'kma'ki, which is the unceded and ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Unceded means that the Mi'kmaq have never relinquished, sold, traded, or transferred ownership of their land to European settlers or colonies. Yet land was taken over without their consent through various processes of settler colonialism. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which the Mi'kmaq and Waspika people first signed with the British Crown in 1726. These treaties did not involve the surrender of rights to the land and resources that they have traditionally used and occupied. We are all treaty people. And I want to further acknowledge that Nova Scotia is the birthplace of Black culture and heritage in Canada. People of African descent have shared these lands for over 400 years, and over 50 strong and resourceful African and Nova Scotian communities exist here today. And I'm committed to this struggle against systems of oppression that have resulted in profound inequities and the denial of self-determination of rights. I'm working to actively deepen our learning at an individual level, providing learning opportunities about anti-racism and decolonization to develop partnerships with organizations serving and led by underrepresented groups. So I do want to say that I work in the world of community suicide prevention. So although this conversation is focused on arts-based research and as isn't intended necessarily for people to share their lived experience stories, we do have a number of people who do have lived experience with suicide, either contemplating or supporting someone who's been suicidal or have experienced grief to suicide. So I would just want to put that out there to please take good care of yourself. There's these numbers here if you need to talk to somebody. I'll also be staying at the end of this time with us today, staying afterwards if anyone needs to talk and debrief in that. And so just wanted to let everyone be aware of that if you're not already familiar with some Roots of Hope work. Okay. And just really briefly about Roots of Hope, it's through the Mental Health Commission of Canada who helps us lead this work. And there is 20 communities across Canada who are doing Roots of Hope work, which is a community suicide prevention initiative. It's really working with communities to help build their capacity to prevent suicide. And we do that through these 5 pillars around specialized supports, training networks, public awareness campaigns, means restrictions, and the final one being research, which was what brings us here today. And earlier in the year, back in spring, we did a research think tank where we talked to folks about what community research would look like for them and what would be meaningful research to help them do their work at the community level. And from that, there was interest in understanding different ways to go about research. And that's what Les kind of here to me today and with Casey, to understand that research can look different in many different ways and different approaches to research. And we're really trying to understand ones that can resonate well with community and help us tell our stories in a way that's meaningful and activate change. So just so that people have some understanding of kind of who is in this space here, these are numbers from a couple of days ago. So we have a few extra folks in the room and some folks that weren't able to join us, but there's a good percentage of us that identify as mental health professionals. About a quarter of the people who registered come from the nonprofit sector. 23, about a quarter of us have lived experience in some way with suicide. A large percentage of the people who registered were interested in just community-based research. What is it about? What methods can we be using? And then we have a few academics in the room who are active in arts-based research or community-based research, or are just interested in exploring what that might look like. And just so people know, there's a large group of people that registered from outside of Nova Scotia. So that's wonderful. There's lots of interest in understanding more about arts-based research, which is great. And then a good number of us that are from Nova Scotia here. So we're kind of missing our folks from the Eastern Zone. We didn't have anyone registered with that area, which that would be like the Cape Breton, Antigonish, Guysborough area. So we'll be working on trying to engage those folks a bit too. And as far as the knowledge of arts-based research, how informed are people? Most of us are not familiar at all, or just slightly informed about it. So it's still a relatively new topic for us. And some of you, I think 6 of you that were really familiar with it. So, we're going to try to balance the conversation out so that, it's not too overwhelming for people who are new to the topic and not too underwhelming for those that be interested. But we're going to share Casey's information as well. So if you're interested in having some really deep, rich discussions from your research in this area, then that's an opportunity there too. And just so that you know the flow of the day, we're going to start off with just having a conversation with Casey, and kind of keeping it relatively informal. We have some questions planned, but kind of letting the conversation go as it goes. Then we'll be breaking out into small group conversations so that everyone has an opportunity to kind of reflect on what they learned so far and talk about how this may apply to your own research, or how your lived experience could be elevated and understood through this type of research method. And then we'll come back together as a large group for any kind of final questions on that. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Okay, perfect. And I'm going to go into focus mode here. Should bring us into, so whoever's speaking there, perfect. All right, so I'm going to introduce Dr. Casey Burkholder, and I'm just going to read right from her website what I found, because when I started looking for people, okay, we have this interest, who am I going to find, right? And of course, I want to try to find some local folks and some Maritimers and I came across Dr. Casey's website, and so this hooked me right away. So Dr. Casey Holder is an associate professor at the University of New Brunswick, interested in critical teacher education and participatory visual research. In choosing a research path at the intersection of resistance and activism, gender, sexuality, DIY media making, art production, and participatory archiving, Casey engages in research for social change through participatory visual approaches to local issues with youth and pre-service teachers. She's the co-founder of the Fredericton Feminist Film Collective and is the co-president of the Language and Literacy Researchers of Canada for 2021-2023. So when I had just read that first blip, I was like super curious. And some of the words that caught my interest was the intersectionality, activism, just the participatory pieces. And I was like, okay, I would need to meet Casey and find out more about her and more about her work. And I'll tell you folks, she was so gracious with the conversation, and so gracious to come into the space and to share her knowledge with us. So without further ado, we're going to start that conversation, Casey. Sound good? Excellent.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Excellent. All right. So first of all, can you just give us an overall description? How would you describe, or when someone asks you about arts-based research, what does that look like for you?
Right. So arts-based research is a way of engaging with participants through a variety of forms and expressions to sort of understand and represent and even challenge people's experiences of the world. So there's an article by Wong et al. From 2017, and they say that there's sort of three categories of arts-based research: research about art, art as research, and art in research. And my work takes up the two final categories: art as research and art in research. So today I thought it would be kind of fun to talk primarily about one arts-based project that I've been working over the past few years with called Pride Swell, which is an art, activism, and archiving project with 2S LGBTQ plus youth. And now I'm also working with 2S LGBTQ plus youth and elders in the context of Atlantic Canada. So the project beginning in 2020, we were going to have young people who identified as queer, trans, or non-binary to come together in Fredericton to make art and then create sort of an archive of the art production that people had created. Of course, we found that there was a pandemic, which ruined everything, ruined so many things, but in this particular case, ruined our opportunity to get together in person. But we used the pandemic sort of as a way to engage in a new form of community activism, which was through the mail. Mm-hmm. And so we sent these art packages to people's homes, people who signed up for the project, every month, where they would receive a prompt in response to a particular idea that the community had come up with, as well as a particular practice. And then people within their homes sort of created things in response to these questions. But one of the things that I find so interesting about this particular method of arts-based research, which is through the mail, is that we're sort of engaging in resource redistribution, which is one of the things that I think is quite provocative about the opportunity for arts-based research in order to explore people's experiences, is because we have the opportunity to redirect funds from granting streams towards communities that are currently underserved. And I primarily work with two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, plus communities. And those are traditionally underserved in the context of Atlantic Canada. So there's something really provocative about redistributing resources into people's homes, giving people the opportunity to explore a prompt to the extent to which they are comfortable, trying out new media, working with different kinds of materials, and representing what it is that they want to share in broader publics. And so in my work, it also takes up thinking through how you can share this information in different kind of public spaces. We use a website, we use social media, because we are interested in reaching people who aren't necessarily essay readers, who won't necessarily be engaging in academic writing, but also are deeply interested in the experiences of our community members. So that's sort of a little bit about arts-based research through the example of Pride Swell.
Excellent, excellent. So, and I think you plan on showing us a little bit about your research, right?
I definitely do, yes.
Yes, yeah. And I love that idea of you know, because when we think of like the funding that's available for research, usually it's like it's given to an institution, the research is done, the publication is produced, and then it's kind of hidden away in these academic journals that most of us don't have access to, or the language is so overwhelming. It's like, what does this even mean for us, right? And so how you have incorporated research into the community itself to be meaningful for them. I'm curious about the prompts that you use. Like, so, you know, people would receive packages of materials, art materials to use. What would a prompt look like? Or how did you get people to kind of be thinking about what your research questions were asking?
For sure. So I can give an example and I can even show people, because that might be more interesting. And just as I'm going to be showing some pieces today, I'd just like to give a content warning. Of course, we're talking in this particular research group. I don't usually work with people specifically on the notion of suicidality at all. But of course, we do speak about things that happen in our own experiences. And sometimes that can touch upon issues like mental health or resources or family experiences. And in the case of working with youth in particular, who are queer, trans, and non-binary, sometimes that can have like negative effects on their mental health. So just a content warning to folks at home. I'm going to be sharing some pieces with you that may bring up some kinds of feelings for you. And I'd like you to also exercise some care for yourself within this virtual space, including perhaps attending to those resources that we began the conversation with. But one of the prompts that we first engaged with participants was to sort of understand, first of all, like, what were people's experiences of community amidst the pandemic? And at this time, when this package came out, it would have been July 2020. So people were still very isolated. And we wanted to use collage as a particular arts-based method because you don't have to know much about art to be able to do collage. The practice is just remixing imagery to create something new. So each package was filled with ephemera collected by Chase Benjamin Antiques, which is this gorgeous vintage shop in Fredericton, if you're ever in town. I recommend that you go. But it included things like maps, archival photographs from old photo albums. It included comic book pages, pages from scribblers, so all sorts of different materials. And people were able to use different things, and made things that were similar, but also quite different. So for example, this piece here is called Belonging, and it was produced by a participant named Bliss. Some of the participants use their own names, some of them use pseudonyms. This is all opt-in, which is another benefit of arts-based research. So all of the participants that have shared things on the website have given explicit consent, not just to produce, but also to share and where to share. So some of the participants were comfortable sharing on our website, but not on Facebook, for example, where maybe older family members might be engaging with the artworks and they would want that extra layer of confidentiality. Something to keep in mind when producing arts-based work. But Bliss speaks about this piece and says, look, I resist technology. So in this time of Zooming and texting, I'm quite isolated. Even before COVID, I didn't feel a strong sense of community. That's not a great thing, but it's taught me a valuable lesson. I can feel fulfillment and happiness all on my own. So my answer to this question is that when I'm making art, when I'm out sitting with the trees, I feel whole. I feel like I'm a part of something, even though I'm alone. You could be around millions of people and still feel lonely. You can feel like an imposter anywhere, even in your own skin. Finding comfort with myself and who I am, that's the biggest thing that I found during this intense isolation. So there are a whole bunch of different pieces that speak to this prompt in particular, and this one here was finding community again amidst COVID-19. Some of the participants talked about the modality specifically or what they want us to take away. And this also helps with us in analysis. So not all arts-based research is participatory, which means people working together to co-produce knowledge. But in my work, it is all participatory, which means participants are engaged in the development of prompts to create art in response to. They're involved in what kinds of art practices they want to engage in. They're involved in producing pieces on their own or in small groups. And then some of them will share what it is they want us to take away from this as a form of analysis too, in a participatory way. But we have also engaged in participatory analysis online and in gallery spaces. And I'll show you those in just a moment. There's one more piece I really want to share, which is one of my, I think, most interesting pieces, because this collage even remixes the instructions that we sent to people's homes. So you can see the figure on the bottom, the participant has remixed the instructions themselves to create a figure.
Yeah, Casey, can I ask a quick question? When you're talking about that analysis, so that is about bringing meaning to the art, right? Or to the work, right? And understanding what the meaning was. So when you say participatory, the person who helped create the work is also there helping to create meaning of what this piece means to them. It's not you necessarily interpreting it or putting your own meaning on it. Do I have that right?
That is one way that we analyze the work, is in a participatory way with participants. But another way that we've also analyzed is by sharing these pieces in new spaces. So including in a space like this one today, where you bring new audiences to the work and people take things away. So for example, this summer when I got together with the new group, Prideswell Plus, which is both youth and elders, we met in Fredericton and set up all of the images that were created in the first version of Prideswell on a wall. And I'm going to show it to you. We had people go with individual sticky notes to say what they understood about the pieces after they engaged with them. So this was an example that came from a printmaking workshop or a printmaking package where people were given tote bags as well as screen printing materials to create a piece. So this one here says, I see you, and we can see the rainbow flag and we can see the trans flag and we see them communicating. So one person said, this makes me think about queer and trans solidarities and also how we recognize and find belonging in one another. And then someone else wrote, I want to give them cups on strings and walkie-talkies. And someone else wrote, apart but together, and people will find a way to connect despite barriers. So this is different than the producer's original intent, but it's a new meaning that we bring to the work together by engaging it in new audiences. And so if the goal of this project is to understand more deeply the experiences of queer and trans communities in this territory, in this time and space, it's really interesting to think about all of the provocative ways that we might make meaning together. So if I think about how this kind of a work might be translated into a context in working in a community-based setting, it could be interesting with a group to create an art piece in response to a particular prompt. But then in another group, for example, with policymakers, if you want to make a discussion about, what's important in terms of funding prerogatives, or what do we need in our communities in order to support people who are experiencing suicidality, this could be an interesting practice of, putting those pieces up on a wall and getting people to respond to them. It's another way of getting people, especially policymakers or people who are in decision-making positions, to have to respond to works in ways that are different than a report, which can be more cold and easier to sort of push away.
Right. I love that, Casey, because suicide is such an intimate, personal experience. And for people to share their experience with others, it can feel cold. It can feel, so these types of, like, I love this idea of people being able to share in a way that's that respects that, and having other people being able to bring their thoughts into it as well. Because we, as when I'm talking to folks, it's amazing how much commonality people will experience sometimes. I'll be talking about something that someone else shared with me, and it will resonate with someone, and it opens them up to talk about their own experience. I'll just share a little piece, very vague, obviously not sharing anybody's personal information with it, but just a situation that I've come to understand, or something that I'm reflecting on myself as I talk with folks. And yeah, it just bubbles the conversation into another direction and creates, more complex and meaning to what I had already understood about it. Yeah.
I will say that governments, as we know, love numbers. That's what they respond to. And so in other projects, I have worked in a mixed methods way. For example, I'm doing a project on sexuality education in New Brunswick schools, looking at the supports and barriers to what teachers experience, what they need about sex ed. And so in that study, we also engaged in a quantitative survey so we could first get the numbers. But the most interesting data is the work that we co-produced together to sort of understand, what do you wish you had learned to teach in sexuality education, and producing media in response to that. That's much more interesting in terms of getting different publics to the data. But of course, governments are so responsive to the quantitative paradigm. Not to say that there's anything wrong with quantitative research. I think it is also very rich and useful. But there's something interesting about how, when you're doing this kind of a work, it depends on the audience you're producing it for. So in the Pride Soul project, the project is really for Atlantic Canadians to think about, what does it mean to grow up here, queer, trans, non-binary? What are the opportunities and barriers? What kind of joy is happening in community? What resources are useful in schools? How can we take what's working in our communities and sort of build it up? But it doesn't necessarily have a particular focus on an audience in order to get, for example, policy change. The piece here is really more about publics and getting the public in general to be more understanding about people's experiences in this time and place.
Yeah, that's great. Is there anything else you want to show us here, Casey?
Sure.
Yeah.
I have Two other pieces that focus
Okay.
on mental health, I think, that are kind of interesting to think through. I have a short cell film, which is a cell phone plus film production in response to a prompt. And this piece in particular, I'd like to give a content warning towards, because the participant themselves filmed their own experience of being hospitalized in a time of mental health crisis.
Okay.
And so there's images from within a hospital, hospital room, as well as images of medication that they have taken, and also images that they've decided to show their face. So they are within this piece, but they have given permission to share this piece. And that's the other thing I should say before I show it, is in terms of consent with arts-based research. In my work, it's really important to think about who is this for, who can see it, and for how long. And so getting participants to opt in at every stage is really important. And we also have a sort of practice after a year to come check back in with participants. Is it still okay that this image or this video is on the website? Is it still okay that it's on YouTube? Is it still okay that it's on Facebook? Just as a method of enacting care within the piece. But that's the content warning I'd like to give before I show the video. And we did check it to make sure that it would work, but let's see.
We did. So fingers crossed. We're still there. And I encourage if there's any questions folks have, just type them in the chat there. And if we don't get them during our time together, we'll take those questions and follow up with Casey on those and explore those questions further. Okay, let's hit play and keep our fingers crossed.
That's right. So Caden's cell film was not just an experience of mental health care in the context of Newfoundland and Labrador. This was also brought up in other people's works as well. So one participant who was very young, one of our youngest participants, took up the prompt, what do you want to say? Who do you want to say it to? Who isn't listening? And in their piece, well, of course, it's not showing up the second page yet. So rude. Oh my goodness. Second piece is the inside of the postcard. And it reads, to Moncton City Council, more needs to be done for mental health. So we saw this in so many different pieces throughout the project, where these commonalities and tensions about people calling for more care, different care that was responsive, especially over the long term. And so I think those are some useful pieces to show the diversity of arts-based practices that took up different kinds of relatable, maybe material across different practices.
Yeah, that's amazing, Casey. And those images are just they just move you, right? And you evoke so much emotion. It's just brilliant, brilliant work. So before we move into small group discussions, I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit on how do you find your research has influenced or changed things around you, like what in moving things forward, or what are you hoping will happen as a result of the research you're doing?
Well, I think in general, I mean, I'm an academic. So the thing that I'm excited about is thinking about how the male can be used in participatory visual research. So I think that's an exciting intervention. But other than that piece, I think resource redistribution is something that's really imperative for academics to think through, which is how we can redistribute the granting resources that we have into communities that are underserved. And then in terms of what comes out of this work, I think if there are more opportunities for people, queer, trans, non-binary people within this territory, in this time and place, to be joyful and to be able to be experiencing joy in systems that have traditionally been oppressive, that would be an amazing, I think that would be an amazing intervention. I can't say that that has happened in the work so far. I work in the context of schools. Schools are exceptionally racist, homophobic, transphobic. We know this. But still, I see so much joy from within these participants, both within and outside of schools, that there's something really provocative here in terms of what can continue to be changed. So I think that there's something so valuable about people sharing their experiences in different kinds of methods and using different kinds of art practices in order to speak to and speak back to these oppressive kind of systems and structures. So I also see that as an intervention. But again, I don't have numbers about like, oh, this many schools have gotten this much less here.
No.
But I can say that there's something really beautiful about taking up space in this kind of provocative way and saying, you know, we've produced this together. And also we've made communities out of this kind of work. And there's something really beautiful about this community that has developed amidst the pandemic when we've all been so distant. I think there's something really wonderful there too.
Excellent. Thank you, Casey. Okay, so folks, we're going to break off into our breakout groups. So I'm just going to pause the recording right for it again. Excellent. Perfect. So so we're getting towards the end of our time here. I put in the chat there some links to the Pride Swell website, Casey's personal website there. I just kind of linked to the publications there because I know there's some folks that are probably interested in further exploring this topic. And she's has written some great stuff and edited some great, fantastic books. And I also put in for next week, we're going to be talking to Andrew Safer around mindfulness and suicidality. So how he has used mindfulness to help people gain better control over their thoughts and this sort of thing. So it's going to be a super interesting conversation. And of course, I've included a little link to an evaluation to see how you all made out. Before we say goodbye to Casey, does anyone have any questions that they would for Casey that they'd like to ask?
Only that I see a comment in the chat that that we can only see the link to the evaluation. The other links that you mentioned don't seem to be there. Okay,
I am on it. Give me one sec here. Okay. Thank you, Tara. Okay. That good. Don't forget about the evaluation link though, guys. I always like to know how people are feeling, which might be interested. But there's the other links too. Anything for Casey? Any thoughts?
Oh, no, I didn't get the evaluation link because there was a delay coming up. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me know. Okay.
Casey, I had one question. I asked this in our small groups. Did you find that it was therapeutic for any of the participants? Gave them a way to express themselves in maybe a different way than pen to paper or speaking?
I don't know that anyone used the language therapeutic, but definitely people said that it felt good to create and it felt good to meet other people virtually to sort of create a community in this time when so many of us felt isolated. And I think also some of the findings maybe about the project sort of spoke back to a lot of the assumptions we had as a research team about queer communities. For example, we found that a lot of our rural communities or rural participants talked about sort of flourishing in rural spaces and the relevance of queer rurality that maybe some of us who are more urban located would have thought differently. Like we thought, you know, you went to the city so you could live your queer life, but our participants were like, no, actually, you know, we have really full and beautiful queer lives in these rural spaces. So I think people spoke about that too, the idea of having a space to create provocatively in ways that sort of spoke back to the assumptions that many people hold about queer communities, but not therapeutic necessarily, but I think like community, yes, feels good to be together, yes, which is sort of therapeutic, I guess.
Yeah, that's an amazing question because there is art therapy too, which is different than art research, right? And there's recreational art, which is different than art research and art therapy. Yeah, but even though it can look the same in some ways, it's different. Yeah, perfect. Any other questions? Great question there.
I have a question. How does drawing conclusions, like what does that look like from the research?
Well, I think most of what we have explored for the research is sort of thinking about a participatory approach to not production necessarily of art, but of holding on to art and of disseminating art. Because I'm a participatory researcher, and in the literature so far, there's a lot of work that's been done about participatory approaches to developing a prompt or even producing art, but there's less that's been written about in terms of what do you do with art that's produced in a participatory way when a project ends. And so a lot of our conclusions that we've been writing about so far are about that. But a lot of our conclusions are also about failures. For example, we began with so many participants creating so many different things. And at the end of the year that we created things, so we did 12 different practices over a year, you know, maybe 3 people created the final piece. So we went from 60 people making things to 3 people making things. But there's something kind of provocative about that failure too. So sort of the conclusions that we've drawn are more about the methods of doing participatory research in the mail and at a distance, more than the findings from the individual prompts. We haven't done that quite as much. More like, what can we do? How do we make meaning as a collective? And what can happen over time? But I think that if you focus maybe explicitly on one particular prompt or practice with participants. So for example, we were talking while folks were in the breakout room about the notion of exploring maybe the supports and barriers to what exists in terms of like long-term support for people who experience suicidality. What would that look like? Then it might be interesting to go into whatever people produce with participants and say, here's what I'm noticing. Do we see any commonalities and tensions? And you can do that in a sort of collective way.
Another really great question. I feel like we could talk about that even more, for sure. Trying to and understand what the findings mean. Yeah, like that's an important piece as well, isn't it? To say, you know, at the end of the day, what does this all mean? Perfect. Any other questions from folks? Great. Well, we're hitting the 1 o'clock. I want to say thank you for everybody who came. Thank you to Casey for sharing your knowledge with us and helping us understand. My hope today is that people just see research in a different perspective and in a different way, and see ways that we can help better understand what's going on in our communities. specifically around suicide prevention and understanding how we support each other in our communities and what we could be doing better. And that research doesn't have to be a very, sterile, positivist, separated piece, that it is connected to people and it can be super meaningful to change the way we see the world and the way that we treat each other. So thank you all. And
Could I just ask if Casey is located in Fredericton?
Yes,
Yeah, and who are you affiliated with, Casey?
the University of New Brunswick, the Faculty of Education.
Okay. I'm in Fredericton as well, and I'd love to follow up at some point. So
Sounds great.
thanks.
Excellent, excellent, perfect. So I will send out information about this recording. I'll send a link to the evaluation again, and reach out to me if there's anything else that I can help support with you with your work. And I will be downloading the chat here in case I missed anything from any folks. And yeah, just appreciate all your time. Have an amazing day, and keep doing what you're doing and serving others. And thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much, Casey. Hopefully we'll get an opportunity to get to chat again.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.